Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Kernels of Truth, brought to you by Progress Kentucky. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We're going to have a wonderful show for you, I firmly believe. This week, we're going to cover a few more horrible bills being advanced by the GOP supermajority in Frankfurt. Got air pollution and ethics in the spotlight. Then we'll check in with Jason Bailey, the executive director of the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy. We're going to hear about the center's priorities for this General Assembly. Then we will close out, as always, with our call to action. But first, are you ready to help turn Kentucky purple? We are still thrilled about the re-election effort of Governor Andy Beshear. We cannot lose sight of the fact that we've sent Andy back to the governor's mansion in Frankfurt to be confronted and confounded by the GOP super-duper majority in the legislature. We can't lose sight of the fact that there's still lots of work to do in our state to win better electoral outcomes for our commonwealth. We really do hope you'll support our efforts to do that work. Make a contribution right now via our secure online website. Act Blue to help turn Kentucky purple. $5, $50, $500. It's all welcome. It all adds up. Whatever you can do is useful and help us get the word out to the folks we need to reach to get more involved, more engaged in our political process. So let's quickly check in with our co-host. Let us know who you are, where you are, what are you protesting today. You there on the internet, we mean you too. Let's hear what you're protesting today. Feel free to put yours in the chat while we are sharing ours. So I'm Aaron. I'm coming to you from Childsburg in Lexington, Kentucky. Where the Lexington City Council is working to end housing voucher discrimination despite what is happening in Frankfurt. So I think, my protest sign today says housing is a fundamental human right. That's what my sign says if I had, written a sign, but it's along those lines. Doug, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. My name is Doug Price. I'm coming to you from Harrison County, Kentucky, one of the premier counties in the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
Top 120 at least.
Oh, yes. Very much so. One of these days, I'm going to gather a bunch of figures about why Harrison County is one of the best counties. And I think I'll write a story about that. And I'll make sure Aaron is not there. So
smart move.
Get that
done. Doug gets his own podcast and live stream.
I don't really have a protest sign. I do have something I want to say. I wish more people would tune in to KET and watch the legislators in action. It's a real learning experience. Sometimes it's very frustrating. I find myself shouting at the screen and that kind of thing. But I do encourage people to be more involved in watching what our legislators are doing.
Absolutely. And then, come here after you've watched it. This is kind of group therapy, I think, really, for the folks who are engaged and are paying attention. All right. So we've got a few stories we're going to run through before we bring Jason Bailey on. But I think, Doug, you've got the first one to bring us to, and news of the week.
Certainly. Yeah, I want to provide a legislative update on some items that we are tracking that we've been watching as they develop. But first, I want to talk a little bit about us, about Progress Kentucky. We are a small group, but we are very mighty, and we really care about Kentucky. Plus, we are affiliated with many other groups, including the Commonwealth Alliance for Voter Engagement. There's a subgroup that meets every week with what they call a Tuesdays at 2 group, where we talk about all things related to the bills, many of them bad, that are being, in most cases, rushed through the Republican-controlled legislature. Last week, we talked about HB 5, and I have a bit of an update. Just a second, let me get back to my screen here. I'm still here. The number on this bill indicates it's a high priority House bill. I note that so far, 27 floor amendments have been filed, which indicates perhaps a hard road to pass. Also, the bill is listed in the orders of the day for tomorrow. During the various debates that I've heard, both sides have noted that if Kentucky was a country, we would have the seventh highest prison population per capita in the world. House Bill 5 is something that's going to make our prison population grow. But let's get back to the no handout aspect. The Republicans have fast-tracked HB 18 and a similar bill in the Senate, Senate Bill 25, which allows rental companies to refuse to accept housing vouchers. Aaron mentioned that just a minute ago, and I think we're going to talk about it a little bit later. I want to highlight SB 7. This bill allows for KEYS money to be used in the mix for those who take the CLT test. What is KEYS money? Here's how it works. Every year you attend a certified Kentucky high school and earn at least a 2.5 GPA, you earn a KEYS award ranging from $125 for a 2.5 GPA to $500 for a 4.0 GPA. If you get a 4.0 GPA all 4 years of high school, you will have banked $2,000 for college in Kentucky. And that's not all. You can also earn a bonus for scoring at least 15 on the ACT or 830 on the SAT's evidence-based reading, writing, and math test. So, what is the CLT? This stands for Classical Learning Test. The design of the CLT often appeals to private religious schools. The CLT focuses on classic literature, often heavily focused on Western culture, and it can include religious components such as a speech by a pope that students will be asked questions on. This type of curricula is more closely aligned with the curricula at private Christian schools than standard public school curricula, which focuses more on the Common Core. Therefore, many of the students who take the CLT are homeschooled or attend private religious high schools and then apply to private religious colleges. Universities in Kentucky that accept this test for admittance are Ashbury University, Boyce College, Georgetown College, the Kentucky Mountain Bible College, and Thomas More University. During debate, let's face it, during debate, some legislators just toss out garbage that supports their opinions. For example, Senator Jay Williams stated that the CLT is accepted at several well-known universities in the U.S., and he identified the major universities with emphasis on major in Kentucky as noted above. He misspoke and said that one of those is Georgetown University. I determined that the enrollment figures for all of the 5 that use CLT in the admittance process in Kentucky is 5,300 students, which is about 2.6% of the total undergrad enrollment in Kentucky in college. No public universities in Kentucky accept this test when reviewing for admission. So, when will a bill be introduced that requires any university receiving state funds to consider the CLT test and admission? I'm going to talk a little bit about SB 75. This bill has 24 co-sponsors, and it seeks to reopen the driveway between the Capitol and the Capitol Annex. Seemingly, there are 2 reasons for this to happen. They want to make this area more accessible to pedestrian and vehicular traffic. And as work is completed on the Capitol, legislators will have to be relocated to other areas, and it'll be difficult for them to obtain parking. No mention of concern for the citizens. I watched this as this happened through KET. The commissioner of the Kentucky State Police, Colonel Philip Burnett Jr., testified that this area was closed off in 2021 due to recommendations from the Secret Service and Homeland Security. He stated that these recommendations were discussed with leadership of the House and Senate, and everyone agreed this should be done. He stated that the state police still believe opening this area to traffic would be problematic. As an example, Colonel Burnett noted this area is used by people to rally and or exercise their constitutional right of protesting. If the area is opened up, then it would be possible for someone to drive into those who are protesting. That kind of thing has happened all across our country. Some legislators wanted him to agree that they could take down the bollards for events and possibly check those people, legislators, and allow people to go through the area. He noted that he is unable to fill current positions and would not have the manpower. After hearing all of this, of course, they voted to approve the bill and send it to the Senate for debate. A personal note, I have testified several times before different committees with the knowledge that my testimony would fall on deaf ears, but you still have to try. I understand that at least one legislator will be offering up a bill to take away some of the horrible provisions on SB 150, the anti-trans bill that was passed last session. And I've already offered to testify on this bill. Back to you, Aaron.
Thanks so much, Doug, for that rundown. So, yeah, that test. So, what do you think's the motivation there? Why are they getting? It seems like there's very few educational issues that this legislature does not think that they are willing and able to delve into for sure. Monkeying with education seems to be their major primary motivation for coming to Frankfurt, right? But what's your take on that kind of Key scholarship? Like, what's the simple version of that story, you think?
I think it's most major universities use the ACT and the SAT. And I think part of this is leading to, they want to make sure that someone who is homeschooled, because of religious reasons, they're able to take this test and qualify for those funds. And I think from the debate I heard, I think just about every legislator is okay with homeschoolers receiving the KEYS funds, but to do it on the basis of the CLT, I think they would prefer, let's look at those students, homeschoolers can take the ACT or the SAT, and don't key just on the fact that they take this CLT that is slanted toward religion. It's kind of my take.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Anything, as Nate notes in the comments there, pandering to kind of religious conservatives tends to also pay off for them politically. So, hey, win-win, right? And I'm all for anyone who gets good grades getting, the Keys scholarships for sure. I guess it's a little bit challenging to, what are your grades when you're homeschooled and what's the, standard there? Is it graded on a curve? But at any rate, I personally am encouraging my daughter to look at schools in Kentucky because she's accrued some Keys scholarship money, and I would like that to go to, not go to waste for sure. And also out of state tuition frightens me. So at any rate, thanks for looking into that one that would have maybe kind of slipped under the radar otherwise. But all right, so the story I wanted to discuss is the House, which I believe yesterday passed a bill to limit Louisville's ability to hold corporate polluters accountable. So really a disappointing move yesterday, where the House of Representatives, really, I think, bent over backwards for polluting industries, but really only those in Louisville because it's a very specific bill. But the full House voted in favor of HB 136, which would limit the Louisville Air Pollution Control Board's ability to issue fines to chemical companies who voluntarily report their violations. So that makes it harder to hold companies accountable, and it will mean to increasing exposure to hazardous chemicals in Louisville. The bill would impact all of Louisville and surrounding areas, but especially the folks who are already facing the disproportionate impacts of chemical pollution in the neighborhoods surrounding Rubbertown, which of course is EJ community in Louisville. In a fairly disgusting twist, the bill was authored by Jared Bauman, a Republican from Louisville, who actually works for one of the regulated air polluters who would be affected if this bad bill becomes law. It made it through the House. It's not been taken up by the Senate yet, but Lubrizol, a company I not actually heard of, is the company he works for, which is a polluter, which is a regulated, has toxic emissions there in Louisville. He did seek an ethics opinion, but they gave him the green light as long as Lubrizol is not treated differently under this law than other air polluters. So they're all getting a big, huge gift. And it is, I think, a bit disconcerting, and goes to show again kind of where the Republicans where they are prioritizing their legislative accomplishments. It's cutting brakes for air polluters. So definitely something that as a lot of folks who are paying attention closely to the rules that implement the Clean Air Act here in Kentucky say that this basically gives industry a free pass from potential penalties if they self-disclose that violation, which again undercuts the ability for penalties to be applied, which that's a free pass. Like, why would guess they just have to go ahead and mea culpa, oh yeah, we polluted, and then get away with it? Seems like a perverse disincentive for them to actually allow more air pollution. So but of course the Republicans thought that's a great idea. Jim Gooch, who's the chair of the House Natural Resources and Energy Committee, thinks it's it's well in keeping with recent Supreme Court rulings, and thinks it's just part of their general Republican agenda, which is to weaken the ability for regulators to hold companies accountable. Just a bit disappointing for sure. Doug, any thoughts about the bill or the process?
Yeah, I do have some thoughts. The Kentucky Registry of Election, the Kentucky Ethics Commission, you mentioned them. Apparently, the legislature reached out to them to say, okay, I'm going to be doing this, and I'm not doing it for my company, and there are other companies be affected. And they apparently gave him an informal opinion stating that, yeah, it's okay. Last year, Jason Nemus represented one of the companies who was trying to get those can't think of the name of them, the gambling machines that are not really regulated.
Gray machines.
Gray machines, trying to get that done. And he reached out and got an informal opinion also saying that, yeah, it's okay because, it's going to affect others too. I kind of wonder, I've talked with people in that office on several different occasions, and they're, they all do a great job, and they're really nice people and that kind of thing. But I sometimes wonder if a lot of these rules need to be tightened down more, because you got a legislator that is being paid by a company who's going to benefit from that. It just doesn't, the smell test, it doesn't pass my smell test anyway.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then, Ralph Alvarado, back when he was in the state Senate, the legislation that he was championing on, I think, senior citizens homes or, different assisted living facilities where he was, in fact, the physician of record for these assisted living facilities. And, just, it didn't really look good, doesn't really smell good. I understand that, that the ethics rulings are that if, as long as one company isn't treated differently than the other companies in that sector. But it does, yeah, as you said, Doug, if you're getting paid by a company that's now getting a benefit from the law that you have passed as a citizen legislator, it just doesn't look great. That's for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we have one more kind of batch of bills we want to cover. You mentioned it in your kind of lead in, the idea that right now they are changing the rules to keep a couple of Kentucky's largest cities from blocking kind of anti-housing or those. Yeah, Louisville right now has an ordinance which gets rid of housing discrimination according to how you are paying for your housing, right? So basically, right now there's a lot of landlords who do not want to take federal housing vouchers, right? And so because they, kind of just across the board do not accept Section 8 or whatever they're calling these housing vouchers right now, that really is a form of discrimination because that money, theoretically spends the same, or it will compensate the landlord the same as cash to a degree, right? And right now Lexington is kind of in the process of passing a very similar ordinance, and right, kind of to the rescue rides the GOP supermajority in Frankfurt, passing a law to block that type of effort. So Kentucky's two biggest cities don't have the ability to kind of manage themselves at all. And it definitely it's disappointing to see this move. It's not surprising, but Doug, I know you kind of dug into a little bit more, more in depth. What's your thoughts on these two bills, HB 18 and Senate Bill 25, I believe?
Yes, that's correct. It's interesting, that's part of the process. The House proposes a bill, the Senate proposes a bill, and then, they go through their processes, each of their processes, and then eventually they come together and they decide, I guess, what they want to end up with. HB 18 creates new sections of KRS Chapter 65 that prohibits local governments from adopting or enforcing ordinances that prohibit owners of housing accommodations from refusing to lease or rent the housing accommodation. I listened to debate on this issue today, and several times, several legislators just pointed out the unfortunate truth. This bill is being proposed because Lexington is thinking about requiring, I don't know, they're going through that process, and I guess the state legislature is trying to take home control away from Lexington while they're working on this issue, and also Louisville. This bill will particularly hurt senior citizens along with veterans. And I understand there are 4,000 Kentuckians without a place to sleep every night, and there is a waiting list time of about 1.5 years. And what I understand about the voucher program, I'll just use this in simple math. I don't have any idea what rent is these days, but let's say that you're able to obtain a voucher for monthly rent of $1,000, and the rent on the apartment that you want to try to rent is $1,500. Then in essence, you have a voucher that's worth $1,000, and you have to come up with $500. And if that's something you can afford, then that's what you do. And what they're trying to put into place is that someone who owns the property doesn't have to accept that voucher. They can say, I don't want your $1,000 because it comes from the government, or you're not good enough because you're having to use this program. And it's horrible is what it is. And couple this with the incarcerate bill, people could be charged with crimes if they cause more than $1 in damages to rental housing. And even though renters may be required to provide, they were required to provide a housing deposit already in order to be able to be considered for rent. And one other thing I want to mention, the other day I was watching discussion on House Bill 5. Someone noted that by law, Kentucky counties are required to have animal shelters, which involves housing, feeding, providing medical needs, etc. But the heartless Republicans want to imprison the homeless and otherwise make it harder for the homeless to have shelter. I'm surprised that they're not touting that we want to provide housing for the homeless through our efforts to incarcerate them. Back to you, Aaron.
Yeah, I find it very, I don't know, troubling, I guess. The theme of the day. I'm just troubled, so much trouble by this supermajority. But the representative in the House who's bringing this legislation to block Louisville and Lexington from ending this kind of discrimination of support for housing. He is a pastor. So Representative Ryan Dotson, Pastor Ryan Dotson, I feel like Jesus had a lot of things to say about, caring for the homeless, caring for the hungry, but I guess not Republican Jesus. Republican Jesus is like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. We don't need any federal programs to help you have housing. But yeah, Representative Pastor Ryan Dotson really leading with his Christian compassion there. But yeah, disappointing. So the House has passed a version, the Senate's passed a version. Now it's going to have to, get sorted out, and there'll be another chance to pass these bills. Basically, the kind of the agreed upon versions, I suppose.
I think so. And I give I don't want to call this a shout out, because if you're giving a shout out, it usually means you want to say something nice. But the sponsor of the Senate bill is my Senator Steve West. And he's this is another situation. Several of those legislators talked about, well, I have rental property. And Steve West was one of those. Well, is this going to help him as far as renting property? I don't know. I guess maybe most of the legislators in the legislature are rich enough they all have rental property. I don't know.
Yeah, likely. All right, so I think that's our legislative wrap up for now. There will be more bad bills next week, I can guarantee you. And I know, Doug, we need to revisit your section about this kind of laundry list of bad bills. I know we promised we'd be tracking them, so we need to figure out exactly how we're going to track those. We don't want to necessarily make you go back and listen to every episode of Kernels of Truth again and again to get the list, but we'll figure something out so you can have it at your fingertips if you want to be amazed and astounded by the enormous number of bad ideas that have been turned into bills. Hopefully, fingers crossed, not turned into laws. But that's, we shall see. All right. So now we're going to move on to our guest. Again, very, very excited to bring onto the show Jason Bailey, the executive director of the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy, a group that really is a nonpartisan organization working to elevate issues of budget and how our state is spending our shared resources. They do an amazing job. Really glad that he's being so generous with his time and joining us this week. Jason, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I described you a little bit. I didn't read your mission statement or anything. You want to tell us a little bit more about the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy?
Yeah, I think you described it accurately. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit research and policy organization. We work on a pretty wide range of issues facing the Commonwealth and just provide information, facts, analysis to hopefully help inform the debate.
Yeah. And how long have you been at it?
Oh, long time. I've been doing this kind of work since the late 90s, actually. So long enough to know better, but we keep plugging away.
Well, I know you guys have kind of paid attention to a number of bills as this session has been underway. And I wanted, you have weighed in on HB 5, which we discussed in depth last week, since gone on to pass the House Judiciary Committee. What are your thoughts on HB 5, and why is the KCEP opposed to it?
Well, I think it's important to understand that if Kentucky was a country, we'd be the 7th most incarcerated place on the planet already. If all of our incarcerated population was a city, it would be our 3rd largest city, behind only Lexington and Louisville. So we already have pursued this strategy of criminalizing and incarcerating our way out of problems. We've been doing that since the 80s or the 90s. It's driven up enormous costs to state and local governments. We spend over $800 million a year on our corrections system, but it has not made Kentuckians better off, because we know that this strategy of continuing to just lock more people up does not address our social problems. But House Bill 5, the reason we are strongly opposed to House Bill 5, is it really doubles down on those approaches. It has about 37 components that increase the costs of incarceration to state and local governments by introducing new penalties, by making already long sentences longer, by creating new crimes, and by dealing with social problems ranging from homelessness to substance use disorder, to poverty, essentially by locking people up. And we know that doesn't work. States are starting to turn away from that across the country. We're not there yet in Kentucky, but House Bill 5 is the biggest threat we've seen in really in one bill in history of making that problem much, much worse.
Yeah. Kentucky, so far behind, we're ahead? Nope, just behind, just still behind. It is unfortunate to see that, and the momentum it's got right now. Doug, I know you got a few questions for Jason, but you want to pose him one?
Sure. I am continually impressed at the amount of info, data, etc. that is produced by you and your fellow staff members. How many staff do you have in order to be able to produce the amount of info? And how in the heck are you able to pull that data off the top of your head?
Well, I appreciate that, Doug. That's very kind. We have about 9 staff. So we have folks who look at different issues. But, we prioritize being timely, which I think is important. As you both know, as your audience knows, and the League of Women Voters did a good job of this in their report, things move very quickly in Frankfurt often, and more quickly than the rules should actually allow. And so the necessity of having information and understanding of the legislation at your hands quickly is important. And so, we kind of block out January through March of each year and say, we're just going to have to be flexible. Thankfully, the amendment did not pass this year that allows them to meet year round. And so we can concentrate our efforts in a fairly short period of time.
What do you think about states like Nevada, where they meet every other year? You're like, man, it'd be great to work in Nevada.
Well, I mentioned I date back to the late 90s. I mean, that used to be true in Kentucky. We only met every other year. There was a constitutional amendment passed in, I think, the early 2000s that created the 30-day session in the odd years. But before that, that was what we did. 60 days in the even years and no time in between unless the governor called them into session. So we've been there.
Well, it could be better, it could be worse. I do a fair amount of work in Michigan, which is full-time, year-round. Yeah. So at any rate, I know we appreciate the attention and the focus you bring to these sessions. And I know that it's a challenge to keep an eye on all these things that are, they're breaking their own rules to move as quickly as possible. But I think an interesting issue is the budget. Obviously last year, I think there was some kind of I don't know. It didn't seem like it went well between the governor and the legislature and the process. I don't know if this year's any better. It definitely seems like the governor at least was able to offer his thoughts about the budget and get his version of it across. He, made it very clear that he wanted to see things like universal pre-K funded. He wanted, actual teacher raises, which, both of those seem to have evaded the Republican version. But what are your thoughts on that budget and kind of what's the process for it moving forward?
Well, this is a really different session in terms of the budget, because for the first time in many, many years, there's actually money on the table, because there's billions of dollars that have been built up into what's called the Budget Reserve Trust Fund, or reserves. There'll be billions more added the next couple of years, unless the General Assembly appropriates it to pressing needs. Like you mentioned, teacher raises. There's important needs like childcare, where if we don't put more money in, we're going to see a bunch of childcare centers close as the federal pandemic aid ends. There are just a slew of sort of needs where, after the Great Recession in 2008, Kentucky, like many states, cut funding for many important needs. I mean, if you look at K-12 funding, if you look at higher ed funding, we're 25 to 30% below where we were in 2008 after you adjust for inflation. And that's not unique to education. There are many other parts of government that have been severely reduced. Other states are reinvesting and have been for a number of years and putting money back into those important services. Kentucky hasn't been doing that. But since the pandemic and the stimulus provided by Congress, we've had revenue growth that's been pretty strong. When people got those stimulus checks, those expanded child tax credit payments, those expanded unemployment benefits, food assistance, they spent that money. It stimulated a really fast recovery. We have the lowest unemployment rate in 40 years, and it's meant more state tax receipts as well. But the lawmakers have largely not been spending that extra money on pressing public needs. Instead, they've been letting it build up in reserves, and they've been enacting tax cuts, particularly reductions in our individual income tax, which is our largest source of revenue and is the source most based on ability to pay. So if you're wealthy, you are paying more in income taxes, as more dollars in income taxes than everyday Kentuckians struggling to get by. That means you're also getting bigger tax cuts when you reduce that tax. So it's a very dangerous road that the lawmakers are going down in this effort to reduce and even eliminate the individual income tax. It's radical. And we cannot continue to fund a K-12 education system, a higher education system, a Medicaid program that props up hospitals and clinics across the state, a mental health system, a public health system, the other things that are funded through government. We cannot sustain them if the effort continues to reduce and even eliminate our income tax. It's not going to happen. And, nobody who is proposing to do that has laid out an option, a plan, or even identified an option that would replace the revenue that's been lost. But the budget that the House put forward, last week, is geared toward additional income tax reduction. They created this trigger mechanism. We can get into that if you want, but basically they are aiming the budget toward additional tax cuts that come off the top before the first dollar goes to a school, to a teacher, to a kid, to somebody with disabilities, to a nurse, to other things that we fund through our budget. So we're at a really, I think, important crossroads in terms of our budget in this session, in terms of the future of our state. I mean, if we're going to defund government, which is what an effort to reduce and eliminate the income tax is all about, you can give up on any priority that you may have of a good idea that would make Kentucky better. Because if we can't fund it, it's not going to happen. All the retirees, Doug's part of a retiree group, all the retirees that haven't gotten the cost of living adjustments since 2011, thousands and thousands of hardworking Kentuckians, they spent their life devoted to serving others, whether it was through road department or a social worker or whatever they did. They devoted their life and with the promise that the pension would be there at the end of the day, but not with the expectation at that time that the pension would never go up as the cost of living has risen. But that's exactly what's going to continue to happen if this strategy, if this approach of shrinking government till it can drown in a bathtub, cutting taxes, which benefit overwhelmingly the wealthy, particularly the income tax, continues to be pursued. But that seems to be the top priority at this point. We'll wait for the Senate budget. The Senate budget will come out in the coming weeks. Then they'll reconcile the two versions before April 15th, and we'll see what happens. But they're just big. This is a very consequential session for the future of our budget and therefore our Commonwealth.
Yeah, I was reading, I think, a really great opinion piece that former Congressman John Yarmouth wrote. And was on the Kentucky Lantern, pointing out that we've got this weird fixation with Tennessee, right? We've got to get rid of our income tax because Tennessee doesn't have an income tax. It's like, well, but Tennessee actually has a much higher corporate tax rate. So is anyone mentioning that in the conversation there in Frankfurt? Other sources of revenue.
Tennessee has much higher business taxes. They have much higher property taxes, and they have extraordinarily higher sales taxes. No one in the legislature is proposing to raise any of those taxes, right? So the other thing about Tennessee is they have a much bigger tourism economy. So if you look at the Great Smoky Mountains, last time I looked, we didn't have Dollywood in Kentucky. There's a lot of tourism associated with Nashville. None of that tourism it happens in Kentucky to that scale. So those folks spend sales taxes when they come into a state. But we don't have that. There's only a handful of states that don't have an income tax, and they have either one of two economies. They have a lot of tourism, like Tennessee does, also Florida, Nevada, where people go to gamble, or they have a lot of natural resources like Alaska, Texas, Wyoming. We don't have those natural resources anymore. We used to have a lot of coal. It's mostly been mined out, right? And we definitely don't have the tourism. So there's not an economic base to support that kind of taxation system, and absolutely they've also had to, because the income tax is a fairly robust revenue source, because it does tax you more if you're getting a lot of income off Wall Street. You pay that, but you don't pay it in sales taxes, right? So they've had to raise other taxes much higher than we have, and there's no appetite in Frankfurt for that. Absolutely none.
Well, I know you guys have been very active and involved and helped set up the Kentucky Together project, which Doug has been involved with, I know as well. Doug, any questions about that?
I want to talk briefly about, you mentioned Tennessee. It seems like every time the legislators talk about the reason behind cutting the income tax, they use Tennessee, and Tennessee talk about how well they're doing, that kind of thing. But I think the records recently show that Kentucky is doing quite well economically.
Yeah.
And the I don't know, several years ago, shows ago, we talked about is Kentucky going to be the next Kansas?
Yeah.
Fortunately, they have some triggers in there that may stop us from becoming a Kansas.
Well, I don't think it will. It won't, because there's, what they're doing is saying, because we have a lot of revenue now, we can make permanent tax cuts. But we have a lot of revenue now because the economy has been stimulated by the pandemic aid, and that's going away. So there's no question that they're on the path to a Kansas type debacle. If they make one more cut in the income tax, that will have cut as deeply as Kansas did in 2011. The economy was the broader economy, the global economy was not as strong back then as it is at this moment, but that's not going to last. You know that recessions come and go, good times come and go, And if you do not have the taxation system in place, you're going to generate a whole lot less in revenue as a result. So they're headed exactly where Kansas went. They're not the only state. There are some others that are also heading down that same path, but there are other states that are heading exactly the opposite direction. They're applying millionaires taxes. They're recreating their graduate income taxes, and they're investing in things like universal child care, universal preschool, things that can be a child tax credit that could reduce child poverty, things that are potentially transformative to their states. That's what they're doing with the money. But in Kentucky, there's no question we're headed on the exact same path that Kansas pursued last decade.
Here is an analysis that I bet you haven't done, and maybe you don't need to, but I expect there's going to be, I don't know, 2 or 3 constitutional amendments that are going to be proposed, one of which is going to allow church schools to receive public tax dollars. If every church school in Kentucky starts receiving tax dollars, how much money are they going to have to raise in order to fund those? Or is the idea they'll just take that away from public schools and provide those funds? I know there's a lot of what ifs there, but
yeah, I mean, I don't have a number on that, but I have no doubt that it will take money away from the public schools. If you look at our public school funding, and I mentioned this earlier, we are at a level in terms of the core funding, which is called SEEG, 20%, 26% less than we had in 2008. So they have already reduced the core funding for our schools, and there's other parts they've reduced as well, far below what we had 15 years ago. So then to come in and say you're going to pass a constitutional amendment that's going to allow you to fund non-public schools, there is no money available to do that doesn't take from other things, right? So it is a choice to defund our system of public schools, which they have changed the Constitution because the Supreme Court ruled unanimously last year that public money has to go to public schools. So they have to change the Constitution. And if they succeed, every dollar that goes to you mentioned, a church school, a private school, a school that's not accountable to the democratic public, will be taken from a public school or public purpose of some kind. There's no way around that. And that's what, in the states that don't have as strong a constitution as we do are seeing. They introduce these pilot programs that are only for very low income people, where you get a voucher to go to a private school for very low income people, but that's not where it stops. It continues to expand, and it becomes a universal voucher, which we're seeing in other states, where everybody can get one. And the money follows the kid. They can go and to whatever school they want, even though the schools have a choice to whether to accept a kid or not, right? If you're LGBTQ plus, don't have to accept you. If you whatever reason, if you can't afford it, even with the voucher, no thanks. They have the ability to do that. And our common schools, our public schools, and they're set in the Constitution, they're required to accept everybody. And that's the reason we have that system in place.
Yeah, it's not a good look. It's not a good direction. It's kind of one other, bad idea that seems to be gathering more momentum. Any thoughts about how the Kentucky Together, I'm sorry if I said that backwards. Kentucky Together's plan of action to fight back against this GOP austerity budget?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is first to highlight and to bring into the public debate the reality that the money is there to do a whole lot more, because they've been building up money in the reserves. It's called the Budget Reserve Trust Fund. Billions of dollars, billions more have been added. There's the money is there to do a whole lot more right now. And all they have to do is pass a budget to do that. So we have an Action Network campaign that's active folks can email their lawmakers, they can call their lawmakers and let them know, the money is there for a budget that delivers for whatever your concern is: housing, education, healthcare, mental health, substance abuse, whatever the concern is that you have about your community. You can let them know that. And it's an important time to let them know that. So that is our priority right now. We are trying to get as many things as possible funded in this budget. And if we can do that, I think we can be on the road toward debunking this idea that we can just keep cutting taxes, and these trigger mechanisms that will force more tax cuts. We can get off the road of that and get back on the road of funding the public services that we all need. This is, again, I think there's important defensive battles right now in Frankfurt. Bills like House Bill 5 that are horrible need to be stopped. But this is an opportunity to be on the offensive, to say, here's something good. Here's money that we have we can put towards something good. And in the process of doing that, we can also divert. We can go a long way towards debunking the idea that we can be on this march to zero in our income tax, and that we can prevent the continued really devastation in funding for public services, which is coming our way if they continue on the road they're on.
Awesome. Yeah. So head to KentuckyTogether.org to email your lawmakers, take action there on that Action Network campaign. And you'll see that they got an amazing group of nonprofit orgs all banding together. If you look close enough, you can see our name as well. It's something we definitely endorse and support. So any final thoughts you want to leave our audience with, Jason?
I don't think so. I think that, the stakes are as high as they've ever been in Frankfurt. As we have gridlock in Washington, the action is at the state level, right? So the issues that affect you every single day are happening in a little town not too far from many of us, right? So let's make sure we're engaged, we're aware of what's going on. Let's let our lawmakers know what they should do, and let's make sure that we get the best possible outcome out of this session and move toward a better direction for our state moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again. Thanks as always. Thank you for your work. We'll keep an eye on it as the session proceeds. But yeah, again, folks, head to Kentucky Together to take action, and head to Jason's website for just more detailed information about a whole range of issues. As Doug says, we don't know how he does it all, but he's got a great team with him there for sure. All right. Appreciate it as always, and have yourself a great week, Jason.
Thank you all. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Awesome. All right, so we are going to move on to our call to action. During the legislature, there's a lot of different calls to action because every single issue that we care passionately about seems to be kind of behind the eight ball, whether it's, as we talked about earlier, it's air pollution, it's how they're treating the homeless. It's, we didn't even talk about efforts to make it harder to vote. That's percolating right now, thanks to Adrian Southworth. Lots to do. But a couple of our favorite nonprofits with kind of most important issues are pulling together their days of action and are inviting you to come and join them in the legislature. So in the next couple of weeks, you'll have a couple of opportunities actually. I think the first one is on Valentine's Day. The Kentuckians for the Commonwealth lobby or rally day. They love voting rights on February 14th. So show up there at the Capitol. Then the very next day is the Fairness Campaign lobby day on the 15th. So yeah, a couple of really important issues. Voting rights, always important. Never goes out of style. And then Fairness Campaign, the work they're doing, LGBTQ plus rights, and always a kind of a fresh assault there from the crew in Frankfurt. But really important opportunities for you to show up. And if you can, take the time off work, find the one that works for you, and please do show up, because they can't ignore you if they're there in person, or it just makes them a lot harder for them to ignore you if you're there in person and if they walk past you with your sign. But yeah, really important we hold these lawmakers to account for sure, as we just heard from Jason about the kind of range of issues that we're confronted with in this legislature. Doug, can you do us the honor and close us out?
Certainly. Progress Kentucky is a nonprofit organization registered with the Kentucky Secretary of State and organized as a 501c4. We are affiliated with the Indivisible Project, the Commonwealth Alliance for Voter Engagement, commonly referred to as CAVE. We're also proud members of the Forward Kentucky Network and the Together Kentucky. Progress Kentucky's goal is to educate, organize, increase voter turnout, and advance a progressive agenda through civic engagement. Next week, we'll be joined by another wonderful guest, Misty Skaggs of East Kentucky Mutual Aid, a wonderful community-based effort to connect neighbors to help other neighbors in need. Production of episode 146 was by Nate Orshan, our very own. And big thanks to Nate Orshan, who wrote and performed our theme songs. You can find more information and music at natosongs.com. Hope to see you next week. And if you miss our weekly live stream on Facebook or YouTube, audio podcasts, our show notes are available on Apple, Google, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you do listen to the pod, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you are listening right now. Logo and graphic content was provided by Couchfire Media. More information can be found at couchfiremedia.com. Signing off.